All right, that was a good cue. Hello, everyone. Uh, Good morning, Andrea, and good to see you again. Uh, well, this is another installment of the CFF live session, and we have been
All
waiting
right,
for
that
this.
was a good cue.
Uh,
Hello, everyone.
yeah, so for quite some time, we have been trying to get together and build up to this topic. So it took probably 11 sessions to get here, but I think we went through quite a few sessions which actually are very meaningful for the conversation we're going to have today, Andrea. Our topic today is probably that's very close to your heart and of course to a lot in the cybersecurity leadership community, which is ESG, and I will let you explain ESG plus T that you were trying to or you have been pioneering to kind of advance, right? So welcome to the session, and we have had the pleasure to have a chat on this topic and on several others always. But I think it is about time that we brought this topic to the CFF community and have a public discussion about what does ESG plus T mean, and why, Andrea, with your background, it's important that you are one of the kind of the leaders driving this, and that T and the iterations of the T that we talked about. There is a huge slew of in the whole vocabulary of ESG plus T that we need to consider. So, welcome to you, and let's start with a little bit of background, Andrea, about how about you got started and your kind of winding journey to this topic.
My winding journey. Thank you so much, Val. It's always an honor to be with you. You're always the host with the most, so thank you for having me, and thank you for being interested in this topic of ESG plus T, because I really think that we're moving in a very highly complex world, moving in a direction where chaos is replicating and just present in almost everything we do. And so it's important to have some simple concepts that help you navigate. So I'll start with my background and then I can explain the concept a little better probably. So my background is growing up in Europe, coming to New York at 17, going to school here, getting a PhD in political science and a JD in law, practicing on Wall Street for about 9 years at a law firm, and then spending about 18 years in several different companies as a general counsel at first, but then moving increasingly into other realms, ethics and compliance, risk management, crisis management, environmental health and safety, corporate responsibility. And the last company I worked for from an internal standpoint as an executive was a technology company that, and this is back in 2011, 2012, 2013, a company that was a technology company, just under $1 billion in revenues, publicly traded, big data analytics. And I was their chief risk audit ethics. And then they threw in InfoSec for good measure. And that's kind of how I got my very immediate bloodied nose, I would say, on all things InfoSec and cybersecurity, and learned as a non-technologist, non-mathematician, non-engineer, what it means to get your arms around cybersecurity issues, cyber risk management, cyber risk governance. And it was a very painful but very productive 6 months that I immersed myself in that with the InfoSec people. And I learned that we're all sort of speaking slightly different languages, but we have to sort of unify and understand each other. Plus, there are all these different perspectives on this topic, and everyone is valuable in this conversation. It's not just about the technologist who knows everything, or the CEO, or the lawyer. It requires business people, lawyers, technologists, risk people, etc. So that was my baptism by fire. And in the last 7 years, I've had my own business where I, from the outside looking in, help boards and executives figure out their big strategic risks, and cyber risk governance is one of them. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, which then leads into the whole ESG plus T sort of discussion. And ESG to me well, I'm live in New York, so you're hearing some ambulances. Sorry about that. But the ESG piece has been evolving for the last 2 decades, especially in Europe and now in the US. in the last couple of years especially. It's become really important. Environmental, social governance issues, and investors, shareholders, other stakeholders are requiring it of businesses. And so ESG has become very popular, and even more so now with COVID. And I wrote a book, came out earlier this year, in which I took leaders on a journey of ESG issues, but I've added a T for technology. And the reason is, I don't think I even have to explain, right? Technology suffuses everything we do every single day. And if we're not thinking about ESG together with technology and some other things that we'll talk about, I'm sure, we're missing a very big picture set of challenges and opportunities.
And of course, and I think, as we become more and more and a technology driven world, every industry, every sector, and every sphere of life and business has been digitized. And we realize the impact of this digitization, the sharing of data, and the creation of data in that many cases, right? I believe we spoke about this in several iterations of our discussions, is that you don't really realize until there is a negative impact of the technologies that you have built. And the social media platforms have been one great example, if I may cite one. So until you have realized the challenges that have come with this technology innovation, you cannot change as a corporation. And technology is typically in the technologies, unless you're a technology company, it's usually in the IT. So the ESG and the T world live separate lives, right, until they collide. So, so enlighten us a little bit on the integration that you have taken on, where ESG and T came together.
Yeah. So I mean, I think one of the big lessons learned of our times, I think, and a leading thought leadership organization that has really championed this is the World Economic Forum, where they produce every year the Global Risk Report, in which they have 5 different categories of risk: a global strategic risk, and it includes economic, social, governance, environmental, and then technological. And one of the things that lives vividly in my head almost every day, because I'm a geek, is the idea of all these risks are interconnected. And so for me, it's really, really important that when we're running a business or an organization or even a government entity, that you think about risks as being interconnected. And as I said, the World Economic Forum has put a lot of study and a lot of thought leadership into this from major organizations like Zurich and others, where they've actually measured relationships between a technology risk like cyber attacks and a governance risk like weak governance in a country, for example. And so they'll show the cyber, the governance, maybe there's some other social issues. If you have a cyber attack that destroys electricity availability, as we saw in Ukraine a few years ago for a few days. When you have those kinds of interconnections, you as a business leader or you as a government leader or as a nonprofit leader need to know those interconnections because they affect your stakeholders. And so everything to me is interconnected, and we just have to understand what the overlaps are in the Venn diagram of life, basically.
Of course. And I think, that brings us to the other, I would say, avatars of T, right? Technology as now an integral part of the ESG discussion. In cybersecurity, especially, there is a huge emphasis on trust, right? So that's the other avatar of T I would build up. And in the previous conversation, that you were part of, as well as the session that we had last week, we saw Tom Patterson, our good friend, talk about the evolution of the role itself. The Chief Trust Officer is in this suite. Where do you see the equation of ESG and T, the balance, and the trust playing into the factor, right? Because that's where a lot of ESG also plays in, where the stakeholders as well as the stockholders have a emphasis on the trust level, right?
Absolutely. Trust to me is the glue that either unites these various disparate groups and interests and the organization mainly the stakeholders and the business. Let's say if we're talking about a business, trust is the glue that holds it together, or if it's not there, that allows things to fall apart. And trust is engendered by leadership. Leadership meaning the CEO first and foremost, the C-suite, and the board that oversees those people and holds them accountable when they need to. So trust is a very, in some ways, evanescent and intangible thing, just like culture is, and just like ethics are. You know, there's these words we use interchangeably, which overlap in many ways. But I think when I first met Tom a couple of years ago at our first Davos journey, my first Davos journey, I was so impressed by a company like Unisys having someone called Chief Trust Officer. And I thought it was brilliant because I had not thought about that term at all. In fact, I wrote something about 10 years ago when I was still a corporate executive. I wrote a lot about things that I thought were important. And I wrote this short piece that talked about towards the Chief Risk and Reputation Officer. And so I was trying to capture the same thing that I think Tom is talking about and that the Chief Trust Officer concept is talking about. I was trying to capture that for the things that I knew about, you know, all these sort of things that are in a corporation that sometimes are not properly organized or represented at the C-suite level and then reported up to the board level. And so I think it's all part of the same miasma of good things that we need to sort of bring together, right?
I love the word miasma. I've heard it from you probably, you know, a couple of times. That's such a sweet word. Well, you know, in the miasma, again, with trust being a factor, you know, I just got off the call. I'll share a little bit of that with you probably to the next couple of topics that we're going to touch on, the T's. With a cybersecurity leader out of India. We'll probably hear on the August 6th session, almost spend an hour with him about the visibility of cybersecurity within the rest of the business. Okay. And I think, you know, he was trying to articulate his pain actually, and the journey that he took. I mean, it took a COVID and a pandemic for people to realize that, well, you know, a big manufacturing organization cannot really survive by itself without considering the concept of cybersecurity and the teams that are supporting it, right? So when you move from technology and build this trusted, you know, relationship and ecosystem, where do you see that move into the other T's, right? The talent that we talked about, and you know, where do you see the evolution of people and learning, both at an executive level as well as the, you know, when we say talent, I think we typically think about, you know, the workforce talent, but there is actually a leadership talent and awareness and education that needs to be built. What's your lesson for those that are actually getting into this journey of embracing ESG plus T at the board level and the C-suite?
Well, you know, I try to always make the case for, you know, these are things that are good in and of themselves. They're important for society, they're important for stakeholders, but business people don't want to necessarily hear that all the time. So what they want to hear is, how do I become more profitable? How do I gain a competitive advantage? How do I do better in the marketplace reputationally vis-a-vis my competitors? And my response to that is, really get the ESG plus T piece together, because you are leaving money on the table. I literally appeal to their sense of, you know, of greed, or greed is good, or whatever, because there's value to go around, and there's more value to be had if you're really thinking about what are my most important environmental and social and governance and technology issues that affect my risk profile first and foremost, but then also my opportunity profile. So if you find out that, you know, your cybersecurity software program that you've developed and you're selling has flaws in it, are you going to take it off the shelf and fix it? Are you going to, you know, create a new edition? Tell people about it, tell your shareholders, your stakeholders about it, or are you going to engage in subterfuge and then that comes out later? So, you know, are you operating in an environment of trust and transparency? And I know I've jumped ahead there on something. I know. But are you operating in that kind of an environment? Are you operating in an environment where it's only about dollars and cents or euros or any other money that people can't Is it only about dollars and cents and one-upping the competitors and cheating the stakeholders at the end of the day if they buy something that's imperfect or otherwise, create a reputational hit for you? So.
Right, and I'm glad you jumped because I think that was exactly where I was going to go next. Because trust needs a level of transparency, right? I mean, responsible transparency, and I believe I mean, that is probably the most impactful when it comes from the tone at the top, right? So when your leadership team and your board, in terms of its oversight capacity, and the management with its governance responsible functions, tries to get I'll use Tom's word, gadgets and widgets out that you are responsible for as an organization, right? Um, how much do you think, or even to what extent, the transparency plays into effect? Because there are rules and regulations. There are, of course, regulations are out there of what you can and cannot share, what impacts your against stockholder and shareholder responsibilities, and what you don't want to create any panic in the market. So I think the security community take on this is primarily been very conservative, if that's not the right word, probably a very reserved way of looking at it. They have, say, for example, when there is they find vulnerabilities and they're reported to them. Some of them have very structured bug bounty programs through which they can take on. And in many cases, they are just, it just comes in and they're trying to see what they're going to do with it. And it stays within the security function. It doesn't really go into the business as fast as you'd want. So where's the level of trust and transparency and the balance that you would like to see looking from the top?
Yeah, these are great and very difficult questions. And I think we're all sort of, working our way through the dark tunnel of which end is up and how do we do these things. And I'd like to refer to a piece that I recently co-wrote with one of your other guests and friends of CFF, Maya Bunt of Swiss Re. We did a piece where she had this idea last year about how and whether companies and organizations should be revealing their cyber statistics to the public, to the investor community. So we started we interviewed a bunch of people, board level, C-suite level, et cetera, different kinds of industries, to see if people like the idea of there being cyber resilience reporting, a la ESG. With ESG already, there is reporting in Europe. There'll probably be reporting here at some point. There's materiality reporting now for publicly traded companies for risks. But there's also ESG reporting that some important organizations like SASB, GRI, and others have developed over the years. Should there be something for cyber resilience and cyber risk management? Do the investors and the outside stakeholders have a right to have the transparency into whether or not a company is doing the right thing from a cyber resilience standpoint? Long and short, we found that our interviewees overwhelmingly approved of the idea of external reporting, meaning more transparency. Mm-hmm. The subtitle of our piece was Transparency Imperative or Security Nightmare. That kind of, it frames the issue. And everybody's aware of the fact that it could be a security nightmare if you reveal too much. But I think we're talking about processes, policies, leadership, resources, the talent piece that you mentioned. Are the right people in place? Are they doing all the things that you need to do to build the resilience? And then the transparency is possible. But total transparency when it comes to cyber issues is going to be impossible given the nature of the beast, right?
Yeah. I think it is definitely a significant amount of risk calculations that you have to make, and the risk posture that you want to adopt when you are making these decisions. Well, I'd probably take a question from our very informed friend William Beer here, who's asking, can you put a value on trust and associate metrics to it? That's exactly what you probably outlined, right? How do we get there? How do you answer that?
That's such a great question, William. Thank you for that. I think as we go forward in understanding what resilience means, there are going to be organizations, there probably are already, who are creating metrics to measure some of this stuff, but they're private, they're for the company, but there'll be eventually some, you know, external facing, just like we have in the ESG world, some ratings that will be done. And maybe it's subsumed under ESG plus T, or maybe it's a separate thing. One of the big critiques of ESG ratings is that they're lumping together very different subjects. And
That's right. That is right.
problem to that, right? There's some truth to that. So yeah, I think at some point, I don't know if you can measure trust, but you can maybe measure resilience, meaning do they have these different things? Have they been successful in their outcomes? Have they maintained it over time? Have they not had hits to their cyber reputation? Which is a really important piece, I think, that we all think about in this space.
Right. And I think that's very well said, Andrea. And it is very hard to put a number on any of these, right? I mean, especially when we talk about cyber risk scores, they have for the longest time, and even in the risk side, it has been high, medium, low. You see the three colors, and you want to gravitate towards a very simplified way of what's a very complicated affair, right? And then on the other extreme, we see, especially on the cyber side, I mean, tons of operational data that only you need probably a PhD to kind of understand in that particular space, which again, another thing that PhDs in the space probably doesn't exist, right? So how do you communicate and roll up this very complicated set of information, which has far-ranging, impacts, and very much deep technical understanding to the board? I think communication to the board and the leadership has always been an issue, right? But how come the finance guys have nailed it and technology guys are still struggling?
Well, I have a very, I think, good answer for that, which is that finance is something that we really understand well. It's we don't understand all the implications, and things go south, and economists are often wrong. But the finance people have something to measure that they can quantify. That's the big challenge with other ESG metrics. You can't always quantify a lot of things. And that's the big challenge, I think, with cyber. Not only that it's harder to quantify in accordance with existing known standards, but it's also harder to quantify because it's moving at the speed of light, and there's just so much going on that, when you thought you understood the latest form of attack, a brand new one shows up the next day. And so I think technology people, information security people generally are constantly on their toes, keeping up with the trends that are moving faster than they are. So there's no way we're going to have set standards that everybody can agree on and communicate clearly to the board. So I think in the absence of that, what you want to have good talent, going back to the good talent, both in the management who are seasoned InfoSec and technology people who know how to speak the language of business and translate all the gobbledygook that's underneath them back up to the CEO, the C-suite, and the board, so that they understand what the most important metrics are, and the evolution of issues and the trends and the costs and the resources. And you want to have people on the board who actually have the same kind of background knowledge beyond being a CEO and a CFO at another company, being maybe a CISO. And we have several friends who are already sitting on boards, which is great, but they also have to be very savvy from a business standpoint. So it's an evolution.
I think, yeah, absolutely. It's also a cross-pollination of that knowledge and that both technical as well as the business knowledge. And most of the cyber execs coming out of the technology background has probably not aided us in so much. But I believe as we have a more broader background of cyber professionals, especially with newer, younger, entry-level workforce that is coming up, probably will be trading in that direction.
And I think it's really important, by the way, especially with the young people, that they don't over specialize, because things are changing too quickly. So they have a really solid technology background, but also liberal arts. I think it's so important that we understand the world we live in and how to communicate with other disciplines. So we all have to make an effort here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know what? We've got a Very beautiful question here from Hani Banayoti, one of the attendees here. Well, I didn't think about it. You know, when you think about the ESG components, each of these components have actually gone on very fast, whereas cyber has taken quite a bit of kind of headwind, I would say, going into a conversation into the board. And unless or until we had this big cyber data breaches that were on the Wall Street Journal, it really didn't pick up that much of traction, even in what it has picked up now. So, what do you think, Andrea?
I actually think that, ESG has been percolating from a bit longer than most people realize. I've written a couple of pieces where I sort of track the evolution of ESG. In fact, the cyber paper that I co-wrote with Maya has a really nice table that shows the evolution of ESG reporting and ESG activity. And it goes back to the mid 90s. Right. And it's still evolving too. There's nothing settled about the standards in ESG. Everybody's moaning and groaning about it. Now, it's more settled, and we have regulators around the world who are much more interested. They're demanding that certain companies report on their ESG metrics having to do with climate change, social issues, et cetera. It's come over to the US in the last 3, 4, 5 years, I would say. So it's kind of new in the US to US companies because they've resisted it in the past. But I'll tell you that I work a lot in this space. And I've never seen, I actually just posted something on LinkedIn where I said ESG wave to ESG tsunami during this COVID period. It's like everybody's interested because these issues of social inequality, racism, health and safety in the workplace, caring about our stakeholders have become so much more important. But cyber is fast, chasing that as well, except that I think cyber is so unsettled in many ways that we discussed, that it's going to take a bigger effort and a longer time.
Well, I hope we catch up sooner than or faster than we are, and I believe with the fast-paced change in technology, it will continue to garner attention. When you talk about gathering the momentum, I think the biggest momentum comes when top level initiatives are supported by grassroots level changes, right? So what would be your advice to young entrepreneurs or students even, who are trying to pursue a career in cyber or that are adjacent to cyber, to have ESG plus T in their mind, and they can contribute to it and probably pursue as a career to the highest level?
I teach at NYU a course on cyber resilience, leadership, risk, and resilience for a master's class. And I had my first group of people this past spring. Right. And there was one particular young man who did really well in the class, who was interested in cyber because he was interested in corporate responsibility. And he was combining the two worlds, which is really cool. We had some good conversations. And so what I would say to younger people who are, pursuing an engineering or technology, make sure you're understanding the world around you. Know the context. Don't just think about the technology and the tools and the toys and all these T things, right? That we've been techniques, tools, toys. Don't think about those in isolation. Think of them as part of a larger set of things that are happening in our society. And so do take some history courses and current affairs classes and corporate responsibility and things that give you that context and allow you to communicate well with other colleagues as you develop your career and you enter new places where you work, so you can talk to your neighbor who is not a technologist and explain to them. Because one of the key things I think we all have to do is this whole concept of cyber hygiene. Right. We all have to have a basic education. I know you're a huge proponent of that, Val, and CFS is a huge proponent of, starting early. Absolutely. And making it part of everyday life, just like other kinds of hygiene should be, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's such an important aspect because that even takes it to the more grassroots level where consumers and citizens and corporate denizens kind of we all have the contribution and that's probably a plug. I should probably put a plug in that whole three-dimensional process of thinking that we have. You are corporate citizens, you are citizens, and as consumers. I mean, these three intertwine into probably just one device today that you use for across the three facets. And this is as much I would say, consumer data protection as you think about being a citizen. You would want to protect elections, right? So you have to maintain the hygiene.
I really want to sort of underscore what you just said, because we're living right now in the most turbulent time that any of us has lived on this planet Earth. Maybe people who lived through World War II had something worse, but what I'm thinking is young people are leading the change now. I mean, I have been both heartened and flabbergasted by how intense the social movements have become in the last 4 or 5 months, with the combination of COVID and then the racial inequality, the killing of George Floyd. It's woken up a whole generation of younger people who might have not been politically involved. And what really makes me excited about the future, even though we're in a dark place right now, is that these young people of all races, backgrounds, different parts of the world, they have been horrified by what they saw. They've made older generations also be part of this movement, and we're all sort of joining hands. And it's about being a citizen. It's about being a citizen of your democracy, hopefully. And here we are in the middle of COVID and in the middle of an election in the US, and cyber has huge pieces of this pie in terms of success or failure. And we just have to look at the headlines from the last couple of days. In fact, this morning, there's accusations that Chinese hackers are hacking vaccines in US companies. Same thing about the Russians. So there's that. And of course, there are also accusations that there's foreign interference through cyber in our election process itself. So these are political issues, cyber issues, health and safety issues. Right. It's all interconnected, as we were saying earlier today. And that's why to think holistically about this stuff.
Absolutely. And that's why, the other question that I got here from our good friend Nag is that, is this going to end up in being a checkbox, or is going to be a bigger part of it, or just compliance culture, or be a real cultural change? And I can't emphasize on the fact that this has to be not just one at the top, but also cultural change through the organization, right?
Absolutely. I like to use the analogy with ethics, which is an area that I worked in a lot as a corporate executive, building ethics and compliance programs. Ethics was poo-pooed and put to the side until the big crisis happened, the big scandal happened, and then suddenly everybody has a code of conduct, and then it devolves back into a checklist. But there's a period where people are thinking about it as a cultural issue. And it needs to be maintained. And that's where great leadership comes in. You have the right kind of leaders, emotionally intelligent people, not sociopaths, not hubristic people who are leading organizations. They will be thinking of culture as advantage, as, as something that creates value. And so I think with cyber, a very similar thing. It has to be a culture thing. It has to be valued. It shouldn't devolve to a check the box, although it will. And there are some check the box things that need to be done for sure.
Right. You have to be this tall to ride the ride, right? So, no, absolutely. I mean, great conversation, Andrea. And I believe when we kind of sum this up, right? You got a very broad set of, as you mentioned, about a broad variety, not just a broad set, but a broad variety of categories being looked at the highest level to make these decisions, technology being integrated into that whole environment, social governance, rightfully so. And then there's this adoption of the direction that we want to go forward with respect to the culture, and cybersecurity, including hygiene, becoming a cultural aspect as well, right? So I believe there is an opportunity here for us to not only just appreciate the good that technology has done, but also understand that the challenges that it poses if we don't address this rightfully. So coming towards the end of this program, Andrea, I just wanted to get your kind of a takeaway message of what would your advice be for getting on to this path if you're starting early in this venture, right? I mean, what examples you just shared and as in put together, but also what would be a starting point for those who are getting onto this journey of ESG plus T and making it culturally acceptable or
Well,
changing the culture?
yeah, I mean, if you're inside a business, I mean, there are people who are doing this work already, whether you know it or not. And, one of the things I always did when I started in a new company, I worked at 4 different companies, was sort of scan the horizon, see who's out there, what's out there, what they care about, and start piecing it together and understanding, it gives you an understanding of the culture. But reach out to peers, reach out to experts within your own company to understand what they're doing. They may have a program already. They may have a corporate responsibility program, an ethics program. Um,
So who reaches out to whom? Just to be clear,
Say that again.
what's the reach out? Like who reaches out to whom, or they come
Uh,
together?
yeah, so I think one of the best examples I had is one of my companies. We had a group that got together every 6 weeks of interdisciplinary experts, including information security, legal, some of the top risks that we had, export controls, fraud, corruption. And then we would have young people who were experts in these areas, who were risk owners. And then we had more senior people like the GC and the CFO who were part of this group. And we looked at enterprise risk management. Every 6 weeks, we looked at the results, we looked at the takeaways, what were the top risks that we needed to deal with. We created these rapid deployment forces. So get engaged with the right people and have an exercise that allows you to understand cyber risk in that context. And enterprise risk management is clearly a really good place where cyber risk fits, cybersecurity, but there has to be, interconnection with other functions and other experts as well, so that you can then elevate it to the right people in the organization and the board.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great takeaway. I mean, put it on the leadership agenda, action on it, and follow through and make it happen because this needs the attention of not only the organization but the world's watching you as to what you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we have seen board changes, we have seen kind of board overhauls on issues of cyber and the implications of cyber. So, Andrea, this has been a phenomenal discussion. Thank you so much for enlightening us and also simplifying a lot of this concept for us because it's been a journey for you, and I believe it's going to be a journey for a lot of others who are going to embrace this. But this has to be more broad in terms of reach and knowledge. So great, and I'm sure this is just probably one of the first milestones of this overall journey to adopt ESG plus T. We will pass on some of the questions that are coming up later to you. Probably, if there is time, we can probably take one more question. This is about: would you have a view on abolishing the CISO role, having been in cybersecurity for past 22 years? Okay, that's a very interesting question because we just got started establishing CISO roles in most companies.
I wouldn't abolish the role, but I would make sure that the role is integrated with other roles. And similar to what I just mentioned earlier, having this interdisciplinary team that looks at the top strategic risks of an organization, and cyber is without a doubt one of the top 5 of any organization. So for CISO to be working separately with technology and IT is not helpful. The CISO or the person representing cybersecurity and governance needs to be part of a larger team and needs to also be a person who can speak the language of business. And that's really not always an easy combination. And we have a real need for people who can do that. So it's tricky and it's difficult, but I don't think the CISO should be thrown out baby with the bathwater. It should be part of a larger reinvention, I think, of how we deal with.
Yeah, I believe whatever the title is, and then right now it's CISO, but definitely a important, stakeholder in the overall organization's, future and role. So great question, but good to thinking. But I think we've got a long way to go before we morph into the next evolution, which we are already seeing. Again, thank you, Andrea. It was a pleasure talking to you. Always glad to talk. I have the good fortune talking with you. I'm sure the other friends too. but great to bring this discussion out in the forum.
And thank you, Val, for doing this series. It's really fantastic. I've attended most of them, and they're always great. They're sharp and to the point, and thank you for including me.
Well, of course, and as you mentioned, we are to keep this continuity of this great series. So next Tuesday, we're going to have another emerging leader who's already established herself as an evangelist for DevSecOps and application and product security. We're going to have Jyoti Chayolu, who's the director for application and product security at Fidelity. She's going to be joining us. She's also great at the one thing that overshadows her accomplishments as a technology and security leader is her commitment for cyber diversity in cybersecurity. So I think two great topics coming up. And as we announced, next month you have a jam-packed agenda with global sessions opening up. The India session is opening up on the 6th. Is going to be another great multi-stakeholder program. Followed by Germany with our good friend Hans Willem Dunn, with India at Pavan, and Germany. I can't wait for the next one. And of course, great to have you, Andrea. Now, coming in and out of being an attendee and a participant, so it really informs this program. And so are the ones that have joined. And this session is going to be recorded. So if some of your friends haven't been able to join, I know it's the middle of the day. Please go to our CFF YouTube channel, subscribe, you'll get notifications. If you are not subscribed to the Eventbrite channel for CFF, you'll get notifications as we put programs in there. It's a journey, as I said, and we are on this to something really good and continue to keep our community connected. So thank you again for spending the afternoon with us, and we will look forward to seeing you again the next time. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.